2016 work session of the New Albany Plain Local Board of Education. We're very, very happy that you're here. I'd like to call the meeting to order, please, and request a roll call.
President Kohler.
Here.
Vice President McClellan.
Here.
Mr. Darrow.
Here.
Mr. Newmont.
Here.
Mrs. Kalinowski, excuse me. Here. I'm not used to doing this. I'm so nervous.
I believe that we're all here, even under true names and aliases. So could I ask everyone to please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The first order of business is to approve the agenda. Are there any additions to the agenda this evening? I'd like to make just a clarification and explain a little bit how our evening is going to work. What we would like to do during the discussion section of the agenda this evening is actually conduct part of the interview with Mr. Sawyers here in public. We would like to do everything we can to allow the community to watch the process, take part in the process, and have firsthand knowledge of both the questions and the answers that will be given this evening. Part of what we need to discuss will have to be asked and answered in executive session. So at some point we will adjourn into executive session, but we are happy that people who are in the room are here, and we are very pleased that we have the ability to share this with people at home. So with that additional clarification, could I have a motion, please, to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr.
Second.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Dominique, could we have a roll call, please?
Yes, President Kohler.
Yes.
Vice President McClellan.
Yes.
Mrs. Kalinowski.
Yes.
Mr. Darrow.
Yes.
Mr. Newmont.
Yes.
And that brings us to really our only order of business for this evening, which is indeed a part of the superintendent search that has to do with our internal candidate for the position, Mr. Michael Sawyers. Those of you who were following and were aware of the process that we used when Dr. Dominique was hired are probably marveling at some of the differences that are occurring with this particular search. The process that we used with Dr. Dominique, although it was certainly designed to allow people to have quite a bit of input into the characteristics and traits of our next superintendent, was not as open-ended as this process is. We have made a real effort with 3 sessions this afternoon, and again with another one that's scheduled for Wednesday evening for those people who weren't able to get away from their jobs in time to attend one of today's sessions, are really a little bit unusual in the world of school superintendent searches. And our aim, again, is to make sure that everyone in the community has the ability to think about this important decision, to ask questions of our internal candidate, and also to provide feedback to the board. Of course, ultimately, as is the case in any superintendent search, the school board will have the ultimate responsibility for selecting that individual. But Mr. Darrow and Mrs. Kalinowski have done a wonderful job so far of leading the board through this process. They've already spent countless hours, handled a multitude of details, large and small, And I know that all of us are very grateful to each of them for the service that they've already provided to us. But in many ways, this is their evening, and I would like to turn the opportunity to speak over to Mr. Darrow, who will lead us through this process.
All right. Good evening, everyone. So I'd like to start, first of all, by thanking you for coming, along with President Kohler. The way I'd like to start is by sharing with you a little bit of how our process began. So when we first received notice from Dr. Dominy as to her departure, we started talking about some of the characteristics we may want in a new superintendent, and the discussion quickly turned to, well, what is it we're trying to accomplish with the new superintendent? What do we want the new superintendent to do? What are the primary goals and objectives that we were looking for? And if we understand what it is we want the superintendent to do, then finding the right superintendent to do that job is a heck of a lot easier. Whereas if you go the other way around, if you start looking for qualities and qualifications that you want without knowing what you want the person to do, you can pick any qualities or qualifications you want, but that doesn't mean they'll be right for the job, right? So we started with the job first. And the way we approached it was by discussing and agreeing to what we are calling a statement of purpose for the superintendent. And so I'll read that off to you. For those who had the joy, the pleasure of watching the 4-hour board retreat a couple of weeks ago, this is not new. This is the same thing we talked about there, but I want to make sure that it's clear that this is the sense of the board as to the direction we're looking for from the new superintendent. So the statement of purpose is this: it's to create a culture of accountability that achieves the best academic and developmental outcomes for each student. And the way we come to this is by thinking about what each word means. And we think it's really important to have agreement and to be clear as to what the words of that statement mean, because otherwise it isn't particularly meaningful. So each word has been carefully chosen to convey a very specific intent. We avoid extraneous words as they only muddle the message and leave too much to interpretation. So here are the definitions. To create is to build upon what is working well in our schools now and to rebuild or replace what is not, with a clear-eyed focus and determination to achieve the best outcomes. Achieve or create a culture. Culture is how we work together toward common goals, celebrate success, confront failure, and resolve conflict. Accountability means we will confront the truth. Goals and objectives will be clearly defined at all levels of our district. Individuals and groups, including staff, students, parents, and the board, will hold themselves and each other accountable to achievement of those goals and objectives. We'll celebrate success at the individual and group level, and we will acknowledge, challenge, and commit to concrete actions to confront and correct failures. Achieves. Particularly as it relates to the adults in our district, the focus will be on achievement rather than effort. Inputs only matter when they are in clear service to the achievement of outcomes to which we have committed. Encouragement of strong effort and opportunities for improvement and success are important coaching tools, as long as we are ultimately measured by the objective results achieved. Best, not good, not better, not incremental, not second, third, or fifth, but the best, number one. We want to be the best district. Academic, this is our primary mission. Arts and athletics are important, expected, and an integral part of overall student development. New Albany Plain local schools should strive for broad participation and excellence in these activities for all students. Assuring a strong academic foundation for each student is nonetheless our primary responsibility. Developmental, along with achieve and academic, a recognition of the importance of building a strong work ethic, the value of non-academic pursuits and overall child development, as well as meeting the unique needs of each child. Outcomes, see achieve above. We must be focused on, driven to, measured by, and invested in educational outcomes rather than financial or other inputs. While it can be easy to ascribe almost any input as being important for student outcomes, evidence of causation rather than correlation or anecdote will be our guide. When our community believes we are getting outstanding value for our money, money will cease to be a problem. As long as the focus is on money first, there will never be enough. Each, focus on teaching and learning driven to meet the needs of students as individuals. And finally, students. It's about the kids, not the adults, period. Parents, teachers, administrators, support staff, and community members are all important partners in our work. Nonetheless, discussions, debates, and disagreements must be focused on what's best for our students. The key to building a culture of achievement and excellence is the relentless pursuit, accountability, and communication of it. A successful leader is able to balance this relentlessness with the humanity necessary to bring people together to achieve it. So again, this is not a surprise overall. We discussed it at our retreat. We've talked about it quite a bit, but it may be the first time you've heard it. And yet it is the larger conversation that we've had as we look forward to getting a new superintendent. And so when we had the opportunity, when Mr. Sawyers put his name in the hat as an internal candidate, and we talked about these things, since we had already discussed what it is we're trying to achieve with a new superintendent, it was a relatively natural conversation and discussion with Mr. Sawyers to understand how he fit within what it is we're trying to accomplish. And we feel very good about the answers we got to our questions, and we want you to feel good about the answers you get to your questions. And so the rest of this evening is going to be dedicated to that. I'd like Ms. Kalinowski to take a few minutes just discussing a little bit about the process otherwise that we followed, because she's really handled the bulk of the work and the details on the process. And I just want to make sure that she has an opportunity to speak to that. And then we'll go right into discussion with Mr. Sawyers.
Thank you. I have mentioned in a prior meeting that we selected Hazard, Young, and Attea as the search firm to work with us on this process. There were several reasons we chose this search firm. One, we felt really good about the chemistry between the folks representing Hazard, Young, and Attea and the board. We also felt like they are the leader in the nation in superintendent searches. And they offered us a lot of flexibility in terms of the style of approach that we would use, whether we went with a national search or an internal candidate, whether we used a survey or conducted focus groups. We really felt like from a process and a price perspective, they would work well with us to determine which pieces of the process were the best for New Albany and would guide us through that in a manner that we felt very, very comfortable with. Our internal candidate is Mr. Sawyers, and we have been working through the process with Mr. Sawyers, and part of that was offering the community 3 sessions to meet with him today, an additional session on Wednesday night, and we wanted to open up part of our session tonight for everyone at home who is watching and is unable to make any of the sessions. By law, there are certain things we can't discuss publicly, which is why we would go into executive session to complete the interview with Mr. Sawyers. Some of the other things that Hazard, Young, and Attea is managing for us, they are facilitating the sessions with Mr. Sawyers. They are also accepting other applications for the position. It's posted on the Hazard, Young, and Attea website, so they will let us know as applications come in. And Michael will certainly be compared to other candidates. And they are helping us to create the leadership profile of the candidate that would be an ideal match for this position. So a huge part of that was the work that Phil just mentioned, the board already did, but equally important is the community feedback, staff feedback, student input. We want to make sure that we have a comprehensive picture of what the entire community values, including the board's input. Hazard, Young, and Attea will also be conducting reference and background checks and assisting us in developing a competitive offer. So that's the process we're working through right now. And I would like to now, go ahead.
Yeah, so just a couple other things. HYA was also very accommodating in terms of their flexibility on fees as it related to the extent of work that they were doing. Depending on how wide the search gets, will determine essentially how much we spend. But even so, their fees are very reasonable, and we think it's a good value for the district for the work that they're doing, and their willingness to work with us, only charging us for the services they deliver, I think is a testament to their professionalism. In terms of speed, we have heard some folks concerned about the speed. We understand those concerns. It's why we opened up for some of these public meetings, and yet at the same time, when there's an opportunity to move with speed, if we get the candidate that we think is right for this district, then there's no reason not to. So, but we absolutely want to hear from people. We want to know your thoughts. We want you to be a part of the process, and we'll get started.
So
Ready, Michael?
could we invite Mr. Sawyers?
So the process we'll use tonight is we've developed some questions in advance to the meeting, and we will each take turns asking a question and try to hold it to about an hour. Mr. Sawyers has had a long afternoon of answering lots of questions, and we'd like to make sure we have some time in executive session with him as well. So thank you so much, Mr. Sawyers, for all of your time today and being so generous in answering all of our questions. And I am going to turn it over to Paul to start.
Good evening. I've got one teed up on the softball here. Please tell us why you are interested in being the next superintendent of New Albany Plain Local Schools.
Good evening, Board of Education. I'd like to begin by just saying thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this evening regarding the superintendent's position in the school district. In reference to your question, I'm interested in becoming the superintendent of the New Albany Plain Local Schools because I believe as an internal candidate, I can hit the ground running. To be perfectly blunt, I think I understand the good, the bad, and sometimes the challenging of our school district, given everything that's currently going on, both academically, financially, and ultimately social emotionally to meet the elements necessary for our kids, going back to Mr. Darrow's point, to be the best that they can be academically within our school district. Given my background and experience to date, this is my 25th year in public education. I've served at the local, the state, and ultimately the national level related to public education. I understand educational reform and I understand that academic achievement is paramount. I believe I have the ability to ultimately forge the relationships that are necessary to take us to the next level based upon the vision of the Board of Education. And as the internal candidate, given the experience that I've had in the last, what will be 3 years next month, I believe that with the relationships I forged already within the community, the relationships I have with staff members, and or the relationships that I can continue to improve, I think I have the ability to demonstrate the success for the next leader. I empower people with whom I work within the school district. I think that I'm fairly direct. Sometimes that's a criticism towards me based upon my current role within the school district, but I do believe I'm straightforward, I'm honest, I'm forthcoming, and I believe I have what it takes to have the conversations necessary to take us to the next level. I'm interested in becoming superintendent specifically related to my current role. It's not that I don't enjoy being the chief of operations and strategic development. I enjoy being back in the public school district after my state service. But quite honestly, I'm an educator and I miss playing in the sandbox of curriculum assessment and instruction on a daily basis. I get to tinker now based upon the permission of Dr. Domini and Dr. Troyer, who technically is my counterpart in the school district. I'm dominant to the non-teaching operational side of the school district, but given the background and experience that I have, she does afford me the opportunity to play in that sandbox now and again. And quite honestly, I miss the work. I've spent 22 years of my career specifically working in curriculum assessment and instruction to make instructional opportunity better for kids. I miss that, and I'm looking to go back into that realm.
Thank you. Second question what specific capabilities do you bring to this position?
Thank you. Again, I said I had 25 years of public education. I've had experiences at the local level, and I kind of understand the multitude of the perspective. The diversity of my career, I've sought challenges and opportunities deliberately to help myself learn and grow professionally to try to benefit kids. I've served as a classroom teacher. I've been an assistant principal, a deputy principal, director of curriculum assessment and instruction, a superintendent, and then I went off to this place called the State Department to run the Ohio Race to the Top reform strategy specifically for the State Department as an assistant superintendent. And while there, had the privilege of becoming the deputy superintendent and acting state superintendent of public instruction. So from a capability standpoint, I have organization, I have leadership, I have the ability to ultimately empower others. I'm decisive, I'm forthcoming. I have the ability ultimately to lead. I think I do that daily within the school district. I think my peers, I'm respected and well networked throughout the state, ultimately as a former superintendent, but even within my current role. I think I actively listen to others to basically take information in to inform my decision-making process. I don't pretend to be all-knowing. I don't pretend to be perfect. I don't pretend to have all the answers. The sum of our parts is ultimately more beneficial as a whole. So when we actually work together and have the conversations in a more collaborative manner to solicit those inputs or empower others to basically create the process, I think we become more reflective, collaborative, and have a greater impact for student achievement. I think ultimately back to Mr. Darrow's point, there's specific targets or outcomes that are necessary related to student achievement. I think when those targets or outcomes are understood, it's my responsibility if selected as superintendent to empower the building principals and our classroom teachers to define the how. They're the ones that are in front of the kids every single day. So we need to tell them, here's our expectation or outcome that we desire for ultimately student achievement. We want to increase mathematic X. We want to do this in science. We want this in literacy, specifically to help our students continue to learn and grow. But then we get out of the way and ultimately give them the ability to contribute to that plan. So there's direct ownership of what's happening at the classroom level, all knowing that there's responsibility to deliver on the outcome. I think I bring that to the table based upon my organizational and leadership skills that I've demonstrated to date in the school district.
Thank you.
So how would you describe yourself? How would you describe your style in handling interpersonal conflict? That's a two-part question. Okay. I get two for the price of one.
You get two, huh? This is kind of funny. When I talk about myself, I'll tell you that I'm direct. So let's just start there because it's the first thing people discover about me typically. And to be honest, it's either a love-hate relationship in some cases because it's a positive for me, but at the same time, it's also an area that I recognize personal growth is necessary on a continuous basis. So I'm honest, I'm direct, I'm forthcoming. I tell people what I think. I listen actively. I'm a reflective person. I can multitask and take in information from a multitude of perspectives, synthesize the information, and basically come to a conclusion. When I make a decision, I stand behind it. I'm responsible ultimately and accountable for what I ultimately enact. And when I'm successful, we celebrate. And quite honestly, if I fail, then I'm responsible for that as well. We need to step back and understand what that means. My focus every single day in the school district is trying to do what's necessary to put kids first. And even in my world right now, I look at things from the lens of how can I contribute to make things better for kids? What can we do specifically to enhance the learning opportunities or abilities of our kids in our school district? I think the adults are important. I value the staff. I value the relationships that I have with staff members. I value our community. But at the end of the day, part of our cultural responsibility within the school district is to recognize that our belief system should be to put kids first. And I think that's ultimately something that I have the capacity to help with within the school district. Beyond that, I'm hardworking. I'm caring. I'm straightforward, which is the same as direct. I understand that. but that's what people say about me. So, I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat it and pretend that I'm not. I am. But at the same time, and I'll just use an example with it, I've learned enough about myself to understand that empathy would probably be something that I can always improve upon. And recently in the school district, and I'll just give you a concrete example because it talks about really describing myself. I know that there are persons with whom I've interacted in the school district that really don't know me. They know of me because of a conversation on the telephone or a specific issue that I was working to resolve. My favorite this year, unfortunately, in those examples would be transportation. Because of the budget reductions we went through in the school district, I had hundreds of telephone calls to support Mrs. Honecker when we did the implementation of the reduction of transportation in our school district. And when it goes back to describing me personally, and I'll use empathy as the example, I think it's an area that I can improve upon. And it's something that I have to pay attention to, because as I talk to those hundreds of parents, my patience level or level of empathy probably got less and less as the phone calls continued, because it was the same conversation that unfortunately resulted in me saying no, which is part of my reputation in my current role in the school district, is that I often have to say no based upon a specific policy or protocol or provision or legal requirement to treat everyone fairly in the school district. And that's part of my reputation, but it's really not who I am as an individual. So I think people, when they get the opportunity to interact with me at a personal level or within committee work or specific things that are happening outside the scope of just a phone call, discover that I'm more than just that.
So, Mr. Sawyers, you kind of just alluded to this, and I think it's a perfect segue into question number 4. You've had the privilege of being the district heavy, the guy who's had to say no all the time, and I'm sure that's been challenging. But what has been the most challenging task you've faced, whether it's here or elsewhere, and how'd you deal with it?
Okay, so I gave you an example for New Albany related to the busing situation. So I'll give you 2 others, one for New Albany, and then I'm going to actually give you a personal one because it's probably the most difficult task that I've been through in my life. And I own it, so I want to talk about it because I'm transparent and honest about it. So let's talk about the New Albany piece first. So beyond the transportation situation that I described, I would say the second one is within the school district. It was sitting down with 50 people in the non-teaching ranks during the budget reduction process and telling them that they're going to be unemployed. It's not that I'm not capable of doing the task, it's the human side of having that conversation and my background in human resources to help them understand how to navigate through that process with the fact that I'm actually sitting here telling you, you don't have a job. So the personal side of that ultimately becomes difficult because it weighs on you as an individual. I mean, I'm human, I'm a man, I have feelings, and it's hard to sit there when I know that I'm laying somebody off that might be the breadwinner in the family in the school district. And that was hard. It's not the task was difficult, it's the human side of it that I would say was probably difficult from a task standpoint. The second one I'm going to use is personal. And you can find this if you Google who I am ultimately in the school district, but there was an anonymous complaint to the State Department of Education when I was the acting state superintendent of public instruction, going through the juried process of becoming state superintendent. And although I wasn't selected to become state superintendent, I had the opportunity to stay there as the deputy superintendent, but chose not to for personal reasons related to my family. But during that process, there was an anonymous complaint received to the State Department. And because I was the acting state superintendent, when there's a complaint alleged against an educator in the state of Ohio, it goes to the Office of Professional Conduct. And the complaint was that there was personal misconduct by me that should warrant in an investigation by the state board. And because I was acting state superintendent at the time, they couldn't do the investigation through the department because I was the individual in question. So it went to the Attorney General's office, and this would be the personal task that I would tell you has probably been the hardest thing I've gone through in my life, just because of the emotional piece of it. And it was in relationship to when I was superintendent in Perry Local. And ultimately, the allegation was that there was really inappropriate use of district funds related to a credit card purchase or purchases related to me and or a board member. So it went through what I'm just going to constitute publicly to say an ethics investigation with the Attorney General's office that resulted in, after probably 3 months of an investigation, lots of questions, very personal, had to relive the entire experience that I accepted public responsibility for. I apologized publicly for it. I disclosed it on everything that I've ever had since then, to admit the fact that I'm not perfect and I made a mistake, and I won't say it's her, but it's mine at the end because I should have caught it, something that I or my secretary specifically did that I accepted responsibility for, but went through this formal investigation as a task with the Attorney General's office. The outcome was ruled by the Board of Education that there was no misconduct, there was no finding for any additional facts, there was no sanctions issued, and basically I got a letter from the State Board of Education telling me all that, but personally, I went through it. And I will tell you, it's the hardest thing from a task standpoint of actually sitting down, and I earned the right to do it. I mean, I'm not going to say that I didn't. I made the mistake, but the process that came after it, I don't believe warranted the scope of what I was put through because of a situation that happened. And that's probably the hardest task that I've been through in my life, was to account publicly for everything that had transpired. But I used it as a learning opportunity to step back through reflection and actually have honest conversations with others to say, you have to be very careful as a public official. And I made the mistake because I had 2 credit cards. They both had my name on it. They were from the same bank. They had the same color. There was nothing that made them any different. And I misused one versus the other for pizza delivery or a gas purchase specifically, but I had to live through that. And I'm better for it because it taught me ultimately lessons in life that I've shared with my family, specifically my children, to understand the magnitude that something can have personally and professionally, but I accept responsibility for that.
Thank you. How would you prepare the board to make a decision that is politically sensitive or perhaps controversial? What do you see the superintendent's role in preparing the board to make a decision like that?
Part of my responsibility as a superintendent would be provide you with the background knowledge, information, research to try to help inform your deliberation related to the specific topic for whatever it is that would be politically sensitive or controversial. To help you through either direct presentation of the information or providing you the resources through board information that would be shared with you. Any ORC or Ohio Revised Code legal review or requirements that you need to be aware of if it has some legal implication associated to it. And really, then based upon the conversations that I think would happen between the superintendent, the CFO, and the board, and or whomever else needed to be involved, try to help you in deliberation to come to some conclusion for recommendation for enactment, if appropriate, within the school district. So I think I would be a resource, but at the same time, an active participant in helping make sure that you had whatever information was necessary for you to make a decision that was in the best interest of kids for the school district.
Thank you.
Thank you. Michael, if you could, certainly in the role of superintendent, you're going to be both a leader and a manager. Could you describe your concept and how you distinguish between those two in this role?
Sure. Leadership and management are kind of hand in hand. The difference for me would be that leadership is for people, management is for things, just to kind of differentiate the two. For the leadership side, part of my responsibility is to empower those with whom I work with and entrust to them the responsibility to be held accountable or responsible for whatever the outcome is, back to Mr. Darrow's point, that we're trying to enact within the school district. So if there's a specific target on student achievement, or if I'm working with Becky specifically on a financial element, or specifically doing something with the board in community engagement, or pick something for the topic, then what are the managerial organizational tasks associated to it? But at the same time, then how do we lead that initiative ultimately to help others? So through goal setting, new directions, talking about changing this or challenging the status quo, because that's really the difference for me. Management is kind of like maintaining the current nice to haves in your organizational structure and everything's okay, versus leadership is challenging the status quo and questioning the thinking and asking the why behind the conversation and the impact that it ultimately will have towards the school district, or helping the school district become better, or helping the school district achieve the outcomes that are desired.
Thank you. How would you describe your management philosophy, your managerial strengths and weaknesses?
Can you repeat that?
How would you describe your management philosophy, your managerial strengths and weaknesses?
I would use, like, currently as the chief of operations, and to me, it's still a blend of management and leadership. So on the managerial side, there's specific tasks. Like right now, I work in the world of dominantly every single day, transportation, food service, custodial maintenance grounds, ultimately in before and school after programming specifically for children in the school district, dominantly. In addition to human resources, the day-to-day functions and other stuff that happens in the school district. So let's just pick the departments as the example. I set specific goals within the department structures based upon what we're trying to achieve. So this would be the managerial piece associated to looking at specific data or the specific elements within a department or the efficiencies within the department or something that we've gotten customer service feedback on or specific data to support the fact that there's a change that's necessary. Kind of dive into that with the specific coordinator in that specific department to basically talk about what it represents, and then ultimately on the leadership side, empower them to contribute to the plan that's necessary to resolve that if it's a conflict situation, or to ultimately improve upon it if it's a customer service situation, or if it's a safety issue, what we would immediately do together to basically ensure that that would be changed moving forward. So strengths, the organizational piece is dominant for me. I'm very organized. I'm computer literate. I'm technologically proficient. I'm a doer. I'm very action oriented. I'm not one to sit idle. That's part of also probably what people would find out about me as a reputation in the school district. Michael gets things done is kind of like one of the bumper stickers that the principals have for me. And I kind of joke about it, but it's actually fun for me because I like to hear that Michael gets things done. So it's fun. I like that because I respect it when it comes from my peers, because I honestly do believe that. Weaknesses, managerial wise, I would probably put it back to patience and empathy. I'm low on patience sometimes because I don't want to wait to get something done. I have to remind myself sometimes that actually slower is sometimes faster because you have to build capacity within the organization or the system or the cog to basically discover that this is what we're trying to do and this is the why. That's sometimes hard for me because I'm 10 steps ahead of that. And I'm like, but this is what it's going to be able to do. And this is the vision that I see. And this is why we want to do this. And it's hard for me to sometimes slow down to recognize that I have to build all of that to get there. But I'm very conscious of that. So although it's probably an opportunity, I don't know that it's directly a weakness.
Okay, great. Thank you.
It looks like I get a 3 for this time. How would you determine long range and short range goals for the district? So differentiating between long range and short range. Whom would you involve in the planning process? And what would you consider as the strategic component of the plan as opposed to the tactical?
Okay, so short range.
How would you determine long-range and short-range goals for the district? Whom would you involve in the planning process? And what would you consider to be the strategic as opposed to tactical portions of that plan?
Okay. Short and long range goals for the school district, I would put back into the context of the outcomes example that you used in your description of the statement of purpose that you read at the beginning. So I think there's direction that comes from the Board of Education. We have to understand what it is that our community is asking for us ultimately as outcomes. And the example you used was to create the culture that's the best related to student achievement, paraphrasing. So we'd have to understand that. So what are the targets specifically related to that in student achievement to define what that means specifically? So short range, there would be action steps specifically developed to basically meet the long range outcome that's desired based upon what that outcome is that's defined by the Board of Education and or the data that represents student achievement in the school district. Beyond that, I would say that you would use to inform that process the current student achievement data in the school district that we would have access to. So the standardized testing clearly that happens annually that is off cycle, but which will be back on cycle by this summer, to actually have a meaningful contribution, because the report card data that just came back isn't really meaningful to impact instruction in the classroom because it's 6 months after the fact, which will be 8 months in practice. The MAP testing that occurs within the school district, or the DIBELS or DRA information that's available for literacy purposes, but using that data ultimately to then determine how does that contribute to this outcome related specifically in a short range goal or long range goal to student achievement. Other types of data that could be collected that would inform short-term and long-term, and I just use an example of climate data related to a survey. So like, what survey data can we collect specifically from kids, parents, or community members related to things that occur in the school district? I mean, we just randomly, and it was very informal, but it's still survey data. I walked through the cafeteria, I'll just use it as an example, and I asked the kids about the food. Mrs. Charles loves it when I do it, because every time I do it, I come back and I have a new idea. And I said, well, this is what I heard the kids say, so let's put a salad bar at the 2-5. That's our latest and greatest in the last 2 weeks, and it's been quite a hit because the kids like it. But it's like, how do you get that informal data to basically impact a short-term or long-term range goal within the school district? The whom piece of your question as to who should be involved specifically, it's the stakeholders. So clearly the students, the staff, our parents, and or community members, depending on the topic. Like if I was going to say engagement, so if we're going to talk about engagement of the community, then it's going to be a much more broader spectrum of people that we'd actually try to get information from, versus the food in the cafeteria is probably dominant to the kids. Parents will have an opinion, but the kids are the ones that eat it every day, so they're the ones that have the most qualitative feedback to offer. So I would say a multitude of stakeholders would be involved in that. Board members, staff, parents, community members, kids. And then related to strategic versus tactical, the last part of your question, I would say from my perspective, one of the things that I bring to the table is the ability to synthesize all that stuff that we collect and try to make sense out of it, because I like taking all the pieces and parts of a puzzle. And basically, right or wrong, it's how my brain works. I can see all of that and translate it into this. So I actually think the synthesis piece is something that would be strategic on my part.
Thank you. Dovetailing a bit, what would you do, or what do you do currently to encourage participation of employees in some of these organizational decisions?
Mm-hmm. I think we have to solicit their input and their feedback. I think you do it face-to-face, you do it in small group, you meet with teacher leaders, department heads if it's curriculum-based. If there's something specific that we're looking to find information out about, you really go to the source of what it is you're trying to find out. If it's a global sense, then it's all staff. If it's something specific to food service, you might only be the food service staff. If it's curriculum related and it's third grade math, clearly we want to go have a conversation with the grade level band specifically related to perhaps that issue. So I think that the topic is going to determine ultimately who the who is related to staff members specifically. There's already structures in place within the school district related to OPSI versus PLE for the bargaining units. There's monthly meetings that are already established as part of the listening sessions that take place, where it's a two-way dialogue where we get to talk about issues that we see as a school district or specific topics that we have from a leadership standpoint, and give them the opportunity at the same time to try to basically bring issues to the table or problem solve directly. So I think that's another opportunity ultimately that exists. There's SLC leaders that clearly meet with the building principals or teacher leaders or department heads, depending on the grade level, for elementary versus middle school and high school. So again, another opportunity to have direct input from staff members. So I think it's just a combination. It's you face-to-face, you can do some things through email, you can do some things through the blog, you can do some things through survey, but more often than not, the electronic piece can sometimes just lose the personal touch because someone can misinterpret the tone, someone can misinterpret the question, they really don't understand the bigger part of the story that you're trying to describe. So it's just easier sometimes just to have the conversation and sit down with the group or the individual that's involved and just have a discussion. I think you just have to be open and have discussions with people.
Michael, what's the most unpopular decision you've ever had to make in one of your roles as superintendent? And how did you handle the pushback?
I was superintendent in Perry Local, and the most difficult decision I had to make, and let me give it context first. Perry Local was Nuclear Power Plant Perry. So I was the Perry that glowed. There's 3 Perrys in Ohio. So I was the glowing Perry as superintendent. So in the Perry Local, because the nuclear power plant that was built, the community next door to Perry is called Madison. They turned down the power plant. It's the biggest mistake they ever made. So when they turned down the power plant, they basically moved down the shoreline and built the power plant because they had to be on Lake Erie. Built the power plant in Perry. So Nuclear Power Plant Perry dropped $100 million out of the sky and built a K-12 campus for cash. So that's what the power plant did for Perry. It went from the poorest school district that went to state receivership for closing in the state of Ohio to one of the wealthiest school districts because of the power plant. During my tenure in Perry, deregulation hit through legislation in the state of Ohio, and tangible personal property tax changed. So Perry faced the reality of going back to, you're going to lose money because the power plant ultimately is your direct funding source to the school district. They have very low property tax, hadn't had a levy in 37 years. Board of Education charged me as superintendent and charged the CFO with this thing coming called deregulation. We need you to figure out how to make permanent reductions in the budget. The superintendent, which was me, and the CFO, his name is Lou, we cut $4 million permanently out of the budget in 4 years, making operational or attrition changes through retirements in the school district. So the first $4 million in reductions came from just changing business practices day to day, looking at class size, looking at elective offerings, how we rotated classes at the middle school and high school, dominant to the high school, and made changes within the physical structure as positions became available. I didn't lay anybody off, but I cut $4 million with the treasurer and the Board of Education. Then you hit a brick wall because Perry's going from a $30 million budget to a $24 million budget. So the first $4 million came for practices that we can make in the school district. Then because I hit the brick wall, then you're down to terms and conditions of employment because we're a human resources business. So the hardest decision I ever had to make, back to your question, Mrs. Kohler, was during teacher negotiations in Perry. For the first time in the history of the school district, I declared impasse during negotiations because of the direction I received from the Board of Education of what we were attempting to achieve in bargaining. So long story short, I declared impasse. Was not popular doing that, you can imagine, for the first time historically. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do because I value teachers. I believe in what they do every single day. But the change that the Board of Education was requesting was to impact new employees coming to the school district and grandfathering all existing. So because it would not hurt anyone currently in the school district, I declared impasse based upon the direction received from the board. We went to fact-finding and mediation, settled in mediation, and actually implemented the board proposal. So my declaring impasse, although it was the hardest thing I ever did as a superintendent, has resulted in $1 million worth of savings to the school district that will basically allow them to maintain the programming necessary to meet the needs of the kids.
Thank you.
Mr. Sawyers, shifting gears a little bit, how would you work with the principals to achieve the outcomes for the students?
Honestly, just like I do now, I'm very collaborative with the building principals. I sit down with them and talk about things in my current world. I don't really see it any different based upon the topic because it's the relationships I've developed with the principals. I would collaborate with them. I would tell them what the specific targets or outcomes are, and then basically say, here's where we got to get. How are you going to get there? Go off, work with your staff. You're empowered to do it. And ultimately know that you're going to have to report to me your progress, much like what happens now with the persons I supervise within the school district or work with daily, and or interact with the building principals. So tell them what specifically the outcome is that's desired, empower them to work with their building staff to ultimately understand how to implement that, because I don't think it's my responsibility to tell them the how. Every teacher's classroom with the 25 plus kids sitting in front of him or her, plus or minus 25, sitting in front of him or her, have individual needs. So we have to define what that specific target is and then empower the teachers to basically work with the building principal to find that outcome and be held accountable or responsible to do it. So I really look at it much like what I already do today. I have very defined conversations with specific targets with my principals and or the coordinators with whom I work daily, based upon the leadership or direction that's provided by the leadership team, be it me, Dr. Choi, or Dr. Domini, and then we hold them accountable to do that specifically.
Thank you.
How would you strengthen the relationship between the district and its stakeholders?
I think we have to start with engagement. So I don't think it's just me. I'm going to put the board into this situation too. So I'm just going to do it. Why not? I'm only interviewing for the job, so. I think it's a response. It's not just my responsibility. So when you go back to strengthening the relationship, I have a role in that, but I don't think it's just my responsibility. I think the Board of Education, the superintendent, the CFO, the other administrators, the teachers, the staff, the non-teachers, everyone has a role or function that's necessary to contribute to the strengthening of the relationship with our stakeholders. If we take it back to the highest level, as the Board of Education and the superintendent, I think that we have to start engaging in more dialogue, because that's been part of the feedback that we keep receiving from the public, is that your current method of communication either isn't enough or isn't right or isn't the right type that's working to meet my needs. So I think we're going to have to continue to have conversation about what are those types of dialogue that we could have specifically with the community to strengthen those stakeholder conversations. So let me give you a specific example that garnered me great respect throughout the state. And I didn't know it was going to do this until it happened. Because one of my frustrations at the local level when I was a superintendent, I mean, ODE had such a reputation. And I couldn't believe when I got called from Deb Delisle and said, hey, do you want to come and be the assistant superintendent at the department, because you too shall be beaten every single day and have this reputation, about what the department does to schools. And part of it's just misunderstood, that the department doesn't really do anything to schools. The department has to enact the rules, policies, and regulations that are either legislatively governed by the state legislature or enacted by the federal government through USDOE. So part of what I did to try to change the face was to try to start a campaign. And I actually would argue that that's something that I think we need to figure out here. What is the engagement campaign that the Board of Education, the superintendent, and the CFO can lead to re-engage our community differently from what we already have done based upon the feedback that we received? At the department, and it was surprising to people because, and I didn't know this until I became acting state superintendent, the acting state superintendent isn't always popular when you go to school districts or meet with superintendents. It's like you're going into the firing line, to be honest with you. And I'm like, oh, I can handle this. Because like, oh no, you can't travel alone. Somebody's got to be with you, and someone should always be with you in case you have to be like rescued out of the room. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. That's not who I am. I can go have conversations with my colleagues throughout the state of Ohio. So I enacted these things called Straight Talk. It was Straight Talk with Michael. Michael did a rolling roadshow. The state of Ohio has 611 public school districts. And when I was at the State Department, they're broken up into zones. I actually traveled to different zones every single month, and I would hit 3 or 4 regional meetings in that zone. So I would do an early morning, a lunchtime, a midday, and an evening show. And the show was no show. There was no dog and pony PowerPoint presentation. It was, I showed up in the room, I had a microphone, and it became open mic night. And everything was fair game. And basically had the opportunity to engage the public. In this case, it was superintendents or other central office leaders, assistant superintendents, chief academic officers, and actually had such great success that I convinced the state board to start doing it and said, you know what, you should go on the road and we should go together, because some of the questions I get are directed at the state board and I try to answer them to the best of my ability. And I'm at your meetings, but I'm not the state board, and you have your purview and your perspective, and it might be different than mine, because they would see that I didn't always agree with things that happen with the state board. And I think that's part of my responsibility, is to advocate for what I believe to be in the best interest of kids. And if I don't agree, then I think I have a responsibility to tell you that. And I did that at the department. So the Straight Talk thing, I actually think would be something that might be embraced by our community. And I don't think it's just me as the superintendent. I don't think it's just Becky as the CFO. I actually think the board should do this too. So no PowerPoint, no presentations. It's just a conversation. Beyond that, you go back to your traditional structures. We have coffees. Some community members like our coffees. That might be a format that we get feedback on. Your Rotary, your Kiwanis, your Chamber, I think you have to hit those other civic organizations to try to engage them in the educational conversation and have an opportunity just to answer questions and make yourself accessible and available. So I put it into the context of we need some form of a campaign for re-engagement, but I don't think that's solely my responsibility to figure out how to do.
Thank you.
So there.
You wanted to know.
We asked.
Michael, this is our last question.
Our last question of the evening, question number 13, barring the multi-part ones. How would you determine the status of the district's current curricula? Whether it's good, bad, challenging, not challenging?
I would begin by having conversations with Dr. Domini and Dr. Troyer, because they're integral to daily operations, with the curriculum consultants. So beyond the knowledge base that I presently have, I can't tell you that I'm into the weeds on all those discussions, because it's something I am going to have to learn fairly quickly, but I'm confident that I can get up to speed on it just because of my background in curriculum assessment and instruction. Working with curriculum consultants that currently exist, having conversations with the department heads and or the teacher leaders, along with the building leadership, so the principals, because the principals also are curriculum leaders within their specific buildings, and talking about the grade level bands or the specific content area, and having conversations directly with the classroom teachers or the teacher leaders that are responsible for that. At the middle school, high school, it's department heads that are assigned through that process. So I think it's part of that. And doing what I'm just going to call some type of an audit. So there would be some anecdotal or formal audit that would be necessary to help understand this is our current state of where we're at in those disciplines to try to contribute to a long-range plan. I know we've been having conversations as part of the staffing process internally within the school district about what to do with curriculum for next year. We see it as a defined need within the school district and try to understand what we do differently to further support academic achievement through the instructional conversations, because you can't be successful in academic achievement if the quality of instruction is not happening correctly within the classroom. So we've had those conversations to talk specifically about options for next year, and I think that has to continue as part of the staffing process.
Michael, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and so candid in your responses. I'm going to turn it back over to President Kohler.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we hope that you will stay with us because we, of course, do plan to adjourn into executive session. The next order of business is public participation. Do we have any requests to speak this evening? No? Oh, all right. Well then, thank you. Lori Klaus.
My name is Lori Klaus. I am a member of the district and I have 2 kids in the district. And I would just like to thank the Board of Education. This has been a very great meeting for us to hear what you guys are kind of going through and how this process is going. My only thought would be, and this is just a personal thought, is that we let the process play out. You guys have hired this excellent search committee. And I just hope that we don't rush to judgment and we look at some of the other people that are could potentially be good leaders for our district. So that would be my only comment right now.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Appreciate that. So could I please have a motion to go into executive session? Thank you.
Second.
Who was that second?
Me.
Okay. And could we have a roll call to go into executive session, please?
President Kohler,
Yes.
Vice President McClellan.
Yes.
Mrs. Kalinowski,
Yes.
Mr. Darrow,
Yes.
Mr. Newmaw.
Yes.
Okay, that motion is approved. We do not anticipate coming out of executive session to make any decisions at all this evening, so feel free to go home and put your feet up and enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.